this leads us to our first question tonight. It's from Julia Mickler, who's in our studio audience. Julia, just tell us a little bit about your situation. What's your question?
Question?
Yeah.
OK, my husband was given permission to leave Australia on compassionate grounds in July to see his dying father in Germany. Unfortunately, his return flight was cancelled due to the cap on international arrivals, and he's been unable to return home to Australia. This is not very compassionate, and I'd like to ask, why doesn't the government have a system in place to ensure that people allowed to leave on compassionate grounds can return home again?
So your husband Andreas is over there right now. What's the situation for you at home? How hard is it?
So we've got a daughter with a rare genetic condition called Batten's disease or childhood dementia. She's blind with a severe disability. And so life is difficult at the best of times.
You've reduced the amount of care that you receive because of concerns about COVID.
Yeah, so during COVID we've reduced supports because we don't want to have COVID sort of come into our home, and my husband provides a lot of support.
And he is the income in the household. His job is on hold, I think. Is that correct?
So he's taken leave, but it was intended to be a limited time. He should be back at work now.
OK. Let's put that to the Deputy Prime Minister. Why can't you get people like this home? Seems pretty simple.
Oh, these are heart-wrenching stories, Hamish, and, you know, my heart does go out to your situation, and we're doing everything that we can, and obviously we're putting the vulnerable cases first and foremost. I mean, the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade are working with individuals on these sorts of cases. There are more than 20 airlines flying into Australia. I know back in March the Prime Minister urged and encouraged, even implored Australians, if they could, to come home, appreciating that your situation arose after that. 374,000 Australians have come home. Yes, we are limited by the quarantine capacity that the states asked us to put in place. I've spoken to many of the premiers just today as to whether we can look at those caps and we can, in fact, extend them. They are limited by their capacity, but we're doing everything we can, particularly for vulnerable cases such as yours. And again, I say my heart does go out to you.
Krisitina Keneally?
25,000 Australians stranded overseas. I mean, is there any more Australian value than look after your mates, don't leave your mates behind? You know, that Australian passport says right in the front that it entitles the bearer to seek assistance from the Commonwealth when they are overseas and in need of help. You know, with all due respect, Michael, there's a lot more that could be done here. Yes, there's a weekly cap of 4,000, but it's not at capacity. It hasn't been at capacity. Secondly, there is caps on individual cities. There are only 4 cities where international flights are currently allowed to arrive. Why aren't we using Darwin or Gold Coast or Canberra, where we could have international airports? There's 13 airports in Australia that can take international flights.
Let's hear from the Deputy Prime Minister. Why can't those options be...
And indeed, we're exploring those options and opportunities as we speak. We're certainly looking at this. We're certainly looking at doing everything that we can. No, it's not a new problem, but it's also a problem that has been exacerbated by states closing their borders. It's a problem exacerbated by...
With all respect, this has nothing to do with states closing their borders.
Well, states have
the Commonwealth announced a hard shutdown of the international border on the 20th of March. The caps were brought in on international arrivals 8 weeks ago. The Prime Minister even acknowledged then that there would be a difficulty for some Australians coming home. There's been no plan put in place. You know, each plane is capped at 30 people. You know, cities are capped at the number of arrivals. We have quarantine facilities. Quarantine is a Commonwealth responsibility.
As requested by premiers, and being a former premier yourself, Krisitina, you would know that. It is a
Commonwealth responsibility. The Commonwealth at the beginning of this crisis brought people home from Wuhan, brought them through Darwin and put them into quarantine facilities run by the Commonwealth. It is the Commonwealth's responsibility fundamental responsibility to look after stranded Australians when they're overseas. Hamish, this government was very quick to put in place a plan to ship seafood out of the country. If you are a lobster or a crayfish, you get a chartered flight out of Australia. We've spent $350 million and 1,800 chartered flights taking our seafood out of Australia. Now, that's great for seafood trade. But what have we done for stranded Australians? How many chartered flights? None.
Okay.
How much have we spent bringing them back?
And sheep meat
Nothing.
and fruit and vegetables. And you
Oh,
have
great.
to...
So if you're a sheep or a lobster, you get a chartered flight. If you're a stranded Australian, you don't
I know you
get...
forget farmers, but you've got to protect farmers.
I just said it was great for trade, but can't a government do two things at once?
Let me just bring in the rest of our panel. Kim Rubenstein, what are citizens' rights? Andreas is stuck over there. His wife is here in the studio. She wants an answer about his situation, her family's situation. What are their rights?
And I think your question also reminds us that the rights of citizens are not only those people who are outside of the country, but of course the significant number of citizens around Australia who have connections outside of Australia, whether it be through family or through other frameworks, because in a globalised world that we'd experienced, most Australians had the real privilege of that travel and connection to more than one country. But the bottom line, Hamish, is that it's not clear what citizens' rights are in Australia. And in fact, COVID has really amplified some of the structural problems that we have in our constitution. And I've brought my constitution along because I feel that COVID has really reminded us of how fundamental it is in relation to the everyday aspects of our lives, and including in this profound scenario, citizens who have travelled and are now being restricted in terms of their return. But in our constitution, there actually isn't any reference to Australian citizenship, nor to citizenship rights. And it seems curious that your fundamental constitutional document doesn't actually set out who the constitution is for. And there are several reasons why the framers in the 1890s actually chose not to include citizenship in the Constitution, both in terms of the federal responsibility over legislation, but also in terms of membership of the community. One was because we were British subjects at the time, and so there was a strong sense of connection to the Commonwealth. A second reason was with the new federal structure, which no doubt we'll come back to in terms of internal borders, there was a concern, well, what would citizenship as a status lead to? And the reason I'm telling you this, Hamish, is because it meant that there is no specific reference to who is protected by the Constitution, nor is there any rights protection explicitly stated.
We are going to have to move on, but Julia, this is your chance. I mean, you've heard the responses from the politicians. What do you want to say to the Deputy Prime Minister? What do you want to ask him?
I just think my husband applied for an exemption to the travel ban, and it was provided on compassionate grounds. And I know you said the department's working on it. Well, we haven't heard from them. My husband was due back, and we don't know when he's coming back. And that uncertainty, he can't tell his employer when he's coming back. We don't know when he's coming back. Is it going to be months if flights keep getting cancelled?
Deputy Prime Minister, do you understand why saying we are working on it for these families isn't enough?
Oh, I can. And look, there are so many thousands of compassionate cases, yours being one of them. And, you know, we're doing everything that we can to put those vulnerable people at the front of the queue. It is very, very difficult. Yours and so many other situations. Like I said before...
But if there's 3,500 individuals that you know are vulnerable, why don't you put flights on and get them home?
Well, we're having those discussions with airlines. And as I say, there are 20 airlines flying into Australia at the moment. We want to make sure that we have the quarantine capacity.
So you're considering more rescue flights?
Oh, look, we're nothing. No, there's no option off the table at the moment. Everything is being considered because we have situations like yours. It's awful. It's terrible. And there are so many people...
I'm just going to press you on this. Are you considering rescue flights?
Nothing is off the table at the moment. We're considering every option.
There is more that can be done. And to go back to the previous question, the government could do something right now if it really wanted to. All the figures are arbitrary. The 4,000 caps, that's an arbitrary number. The size of hotel quarantine, that's arbitrary. The way that hotel quarantine is done is changeable, and I think a little bit of compassion is what is needed here to look after the lives of Australians, and that also means protecting us here in Australia from the virus. So don't take what I said as not being supportive of hotel quarantine. It is the thing. The international border restrictions are the one most successful measure that has protected this country from the virus, and when it goes wrong, as we've seen so horribly demonstrated in Victoria, the effects are are terrible. So we do need the border restrictions. We do need the hotel quarantine, but the government can look after Australians at the same time.
Omar, Khorshid, given that this may be something that is a long-term scenario that Australia and the world is in, should we be looking at more structured facilities, quarantine facilities? Northern Territory was referenced, Christmas Island has been referenced as well. I mean, do you think Australia needs to have a returning passenger quarantine system in place?
It's certainly something that should be looked at. There are risks and benefits with that sort of approach, and they can feel, I think, a little like a prison, as many of our asylum seekers would know.
But so too these hotel rooms that people find themselves locked in for 2 weeks without a window or a balcony that they can open.
Yeah, the hotel quarantine is tough, but it's something that's been brought in very quickly without a lot of time. And as we know, it takes government an awful long time to do most things. But, you know, there's no doubt there is an opportunity for the government to do more, to expand the quarantine, to do it in different ways. But it's absolutely imperative that the quarantine is strong and that we don't let the virus escape. I think the other thing, though, that can be done for people in the terrible situations of being stuck overseas for the moment is to reach out with more mental health services from Australia. And the AMA would certainly like to see the government look into what can we do from Australia to help whilst Australians who are struggling are still stuck until they can get back to Australia. What else can we do to reach out and assist them?